Yes. Right. So without further ado, as they say, Catherine, would you be so kind as to... Yeah, Catherine, you can begin now if you would, please.
Yeah. Okay, I lost you there for a second. Good evening. It's good to be with you all and to be able to tell you a little bit about an extremely little known footnote to the history of the 17th century of England and Ireland. How Ireland was nearly leased in perpetuity to the Jews. In 1656, 5 years after the end of the English Civil Wars, the Irish question and the Jewish question, two perennial thorns in the flesh of the English and the world at large, respectively, were nearly resolved in a one-page proposal put to Oliver Cromwell, since 1653, the Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland, put to him by Baronet Sir James Harrington, an aristocratic political theorist who, despite long friendship and genuine affection for the executed King Charles I, was strongly concerned to find a means of controlling the political strife of post-Civil War England. The antiquary and biographer and contemporary of Harrington's, John Aubrey, commented on the strength of the bond between the monarch and the baronet that transcended Harrington's classical republicanism, saying that the king loved his company, only he would not hear of a commonwealth, and Mr. Harrington passionately loved the king. Although loyal to Parliament, Harrington accepted Charles's invitation to become a gentleman groom of the royal bedchamber in 1647 and stayed with the king during his captivity at Carisbrooke Castle on the Isle of Wight until in early January 1649, when he was removed by Parliament for refusing to swear to report anything he might learn of a royal escape attempt, and was then briefly imprisoned. But he was released in time to be present on the scaffold at Charles's execution on the 30th of January. Harrington's novel policy paper was simple, if not easy to achieve. In order to create a permanent and stable government in England, he advised Cromwell to lease Ireland in perpetuity to the Jews, with the Irish lands being divided up into small parcels by lot, as in the days of the Hebrew Commonwealth in Canaan, as described in the Old Testament, having first removed the quarrelsome and ineffective Anglo-Irish landlords. According to Harrington's understanding, this dispersion of property would create an eternally balanced state, free from the dangers of insurrection and internal degeneration. Why were these two issues so pressing at this time for the English? We'll look at the first question, being the Jewish question. Harrington, a serious thinker, in the same league, but not as well known as John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, made his extraordinary suggestion to Cromwell, bearing in mind that in this same year of 1656, Cromwell had failed in his attempt to resolve the Jewish question. The question being, should the Jews, expelled in 1290 from England, after several centuries of increasing persecution, expelled by Edward I, who banished them permanently after relieving them of their portable property on the way out, should they, the Jews, after 366 years, be readmitted to England as full citizens. As some Protestants desired readmission of the Jews to England as an essential precursor to the return of Christ. And if you're interested in hearing more about that, we can do that later on in the Q&A. But many ordinary citizens did not, and there was much opposition from clerics. Despite this negative view of Jewish immigration, an influx of Jewish merchants was an integral part of the Commonwealth's mercantilist policy. The financial benefits of the return of a large mercantile Jewish population were to be eagerly sought. This idea had roots in the Committee for Trade of Charles I's Privy Council, and after the king's trial and execution, in the Council for Trade of the Rump Parliament of 1650. Apart from commercial considerations, so very important for nearly bankrupted England after more than a decade of civil strife and devastation to trade and agriculture, Cromwell, already sympathetic to the Jews from his Puritan Protestant background, was influenced, indeed nearly pressured, by lobbying from Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel of Amsterdam, a leader of the Jewish community there, who petitioned Cromwell in 1651 to admit Dutch Jews to England. Ben Israel's pamphlet, The Hope of Israel, argued from scripture that messianic redemption would not come to the Jewish people until they were scattered in all corners of the earth, which of course included England. There were many Jewish refugees in Amsterdam who had fled persecutions in Europe, particularly from Spain and Portugal during the Inquisition, and also as a result of the dislocation of population due to the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. Although not official, there was a small Jewish community in London by 1656. Individuals and families who had entered under the radar, consisting of 27 males, mainly heads of households, so about 100 plus, and maybe 120 individuals, mainly Spanish and Portuguese. There were two synagogues, one for the Sephardic Jews in Church Lane, and another for the Ashkenazim at St. Helens, as well as a small cemetery at Mile End. During Cromwell's protectorate, Jews held public worship in their synagogues. They started out with private meetings in their houses, but they were permitted to have public worship in the synagogues, and traded unhindered, even having a member representing them on the exchange, one Solomon Dormido. War between the Dutch and the English delayed Rabbi Manasseh's visit until 1655, when Cromwell convened a conference of clergy, prominent merchants, and lawyers at Whitehall in December, the 4th to the 18th, to consider Cromwell's petition to the Council of State, calling for the return of the Jews officially and with full citizenship. The conference failed to reach a definitive conclusion as to whether or not the return should be sanctioned. But legal scholars agree that there is no law against the Jews coming. This was correct, as the expulsion of 1290 had been effected by a royal decree not something based on parliamentary legislation. Although the Whitehall Conference resisted the naturalization of the Jews, Cromwell issued a verbal promise, backed by the Council of State, to allow Jews to return and practice their faith freely and engage in trade unimpeded. As the conditions for the Jews under Cromwell were so salubrious, why then did Harrington think they needed to find another home, not England? The answer lies in his political treatise, Oceana, a blueprint for a utopian English commonwealth or republic, which he wrote shut up in his study as he mourned for his friend the king. It's possible to think of Oceana as the intellectual solution to an emotional trauma, an attempt to reconcile himself to the king's fate by demonstrating that the monarchy had become historically obsolete. Now, I'm going to read you the page from Oceana that Harrington presented to Cromwell. It is in somewhat archaic English, as this is written in the 17th century. And it also comes with a warning, as so many television programs do, that you may find some of the language and concepts offensive. They are certainly out of date. In this proposal, in this page, the name Oceana stands for England, and Panoplia is Harrington's name for Ireland. Panoplia, the soft mother of a slothful and pusillanimous people, is a neighbor island anciently subjected by the arms of Oceana, since almost depopulated for shaking off the yoke, and at length replanted with a new race. But through what virtues of the soil or vice of the air soever it be, they come still to degenerate. Wherefore, seeing it is not likely to yield men fit for arms, nor necessary it should, it had been the interest of Oceana so to have disposed of the province, being both rich in the nature of the soil and full of commodious ports for trade, that it might have been ordered for the best in relation to her purse. Which, in my opinion, if it had been thought of in time, might have been best done by planting it with Jews, allowing them their own rights and laws, for that would have brought them suddenly from all parts of the world and in sufficient numbers. And though the Jews be not altogether for merchandise, yet in the land of Canaan, since their exile from whence they have not been landlords, they were altogether for agriculture. And there's no cause why a man should doubt, but having a fruitful country and good ports too, they would be good at both. Panoplia, well peopled, would be worth a matter of 4 millions dry rents. That is besides the advantage of the agriculture and trade, which with a nation of that industry come at least unto as much more. Wherefore, Panoplia, being farmed out unto the Jews and their heirs forever, and for 2 millions annual revenue from that time forward, besides the customs which would pay the provincial army, would have been a bargain of such advantage both unto them and this commonwealth as is not to be found otherwise by either. Harrington finishes his proposal and caps his argument for settling the Jews into Ireland, not just those Jews already in England, but the entire worldwide Jewish diaspora by asserting that to receive the Jews after any other manner into a commonwealth were to maim it, for they of all nations never incorporate, but taking up the room of a limb are of no use or office unto the body, while they suck the nourishment which would sustain natural and useful members. Although this sounds hugely anti-Semitic, in the context of Harrington's argument, it simply meant that it was hopeless trying to convert the Jews. It was very seldom that they did convert. Yes, there were forced conversions, as with the Inquisition, but not voluntarily, not until really the 19th century and the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, and also the political freedoms that came, particularly in Germany after 1871, when it was unified and the Jews were liberated both civilly and politically, and they could participate fully in life. So Harrington is really saying, don't bother, you're not going to succeed in converting the Jews. And so rather than leave them as an alien presence in a Christian culture where their commercial successes might exacerbate strong jealousy, joined to great religious antipathy on the part of some in England, would make them a potential focus for unrest. Far better to set them up somewhere where their skills and natural talents, as Christians saw it, could be put to good use. And so, if Harrington could convince Cromwell that he had a viable alternative for a forever home for the Jews, its successful implementation might result in him being offered a paid job as a political advisor, which was what he was hoping for. The Dominic Cummings of the 1650s. There was, of course, another more pressing issue to be resolved: the Irish question. For centuries, Ireland had served as the back door for invasion of England, both in reality and as an ever-present threat in the background. Ireland served as the back door for pretenders to the English crown. And in the century before the time that Harrington is writing, there were three. In 1460, Richard of York launched an unsuccessful attempt to take the throne, launched it from Ireland. And in 1487, the pretender Lambert Simnel was crowned in Dublin and backed by the English Parliament and launched an unsuccessful invasion. And in 1491, Perkin Warbeck, another pretender, began his campaign to seize the throne of England from Ireland. Ireland also served as a launchpad for invasion by England's rivals. And in 1574, one Captain Diego Ortiz de Urizar, a Spaniard visiting England and Ireland, put it absolutely perfectly in one sentence. And he said, "He who would England win must with Ireland begin." And 8 years after that, he was proved right when there was a mixed group of Spanish and Italian mercenaries who landed in Kerry on their way to England. James Harrington was thinking and writing at a time of extreme unrest. By the end of the period of the English Civil Wars, 1639 to 52, there were more than 200,000 dead, roughly 34,000 parliamentarians, 50,000 royalists, and more than 100,000 dead from war-related diseases and hunger. Many more also died in Ireland and Scotland. The very foundations of society were shaken. Interminable war with its vast destruction of private property, hunger leading to starvation, the anxiety of standing armies in all parts of England. And that one was really ironic because one of the 4 original grievances that Parliament issued to Charles I at the very start of all the trouble was that he billeted his soldiers and sailors without any permission on private houses. The proliferation of radical religious sects, and ultimately the trial and beheading of an anointed sovereign, all took their toll. And I think for us today, it's very difficult to put ourselves in the shoes of people in those days who would have been truly shocked to their core by the execution of an anointed sovereign. By 1656, when Harrington writes his proposal, the First Anglo-Dutch War, 1652-4, had also taken place in Cromwell's watch. This conflict, the first of 4 stretching over a century, was largely a trade dispute. Cromwell's concern was to challenge the Dutch dominance in global commerce, but there were other sources of friction. The Dutch had driven out the English from the East Indies. The Dutch monopolized the herring fishing off the east coast of England, and they contested the English attempt to annex some Portuguese and Spanish colonial possessions, which were being shed as the Spanish and Portuguese lost their preeminence as a power. The ultimate blow, however, came from the passing of the first Navigation Act in 1651, which helped to provoke the outbreak of war the following year. This measure cut out the Dutch entrepot, their function as middlemen to all global goods, all global trade, with cargoes being routed through the Netherlands. The Act ordered that all goods imported into England must be carried directly to England from the country of origin and transported only on English vessels. Cromwell had a lot on his plate. How wonderful it would be if the stress and strife of at least one of the issues could be made to disappear. And this is what James Harrington attempted to do. Genuinely depressed at the condition of his country, but also hoping to ease his cash flow, Harrington presented the Lord Protector with the unprecedented opportunity, as he saw it, to turn the liability of the turbulent and rebellious neighbor across the Irish Sea into a peaceful and prosperous country, filled with industrious and happy Jewish farmers and prosperous, civic-minded Jewish merchants, dwelling in very tidy towns, particularly the seaports. And as we read in the actual original proposal, Ireland had 2 great advantages waiting to be exploited. It was a very fertile country with an even softer maritime climate than England. And it had numerous good ports for the export of agriculture, produce, and general commerce. But it did not live up to its potential, either in agriculture or in trade. And it was a troublesome colony for the British, English as they were then, a permanently bubbling pot of disaffection, boiling over into insurrection. Shortly before Harrington wrote Oceana, the country had been convulsed by 11 years of warfare, beginning with Phelim O'Neill's rebellion of 1641, creating a seeping drain on the English economy, necessitating recurring military expeditions and costly garrisoning. In their proclamation of the Irish Republic, the leaders of the Easter Rising remarked, "In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty." 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms. Some of these rebellions before O'Neill's were 1534, Silken Thomas's Rebellion, and 1569 to 73, and 1579 to 83, the First and Second Desmond Rebellions, 1593 to 1603, the 9 Years' War. Ireland was in turmoil during large portions of the 16th and 17th century. And apart from the menace of insurrection, Harrington, in his proposal, measured the native Irish against the Jews, to the detriment of the former. He had called the Irish slothful and pusillanimous, cowardly, and unfit to make soldiers. And he thought that because the Jews had been an agricultural society in Canaan, they would make excellent husbandmen, despite the fact that for over 1,500 years, they had neither owned nor worked land. Equally, their mercantile skills and experience would facilitate the export of produce, and Ireland would become an English asset rather than a burden, and all thanks to its Jewish tenants. 7 years after the death of Charles I, a group of army officers, discontented with Cromwell's assumption of power, they accused him of deserting the cause of a free commonwealth to set up a military monarchy, sounded out Harrington with regard to the establishment of a commonwealth. Harrington played dumb, said he didn't know what they meant by a commonwealth, or, quote, if there were such a thing. Then some sober men appeared and said, if any man in England could show what a commonwealth was, it was myself. Upon this persuasion, I wrote. But what influenced his thinking? I think we need to look at Harrington, the man, for a moment to try to work that out. He was the eldest son of a Lincolnshire baronet, and James attended Trinity College, Oxford, but left with no degree after 2 years. He also studied law briefly, then did what would be expected of someone of his rank at that time. He traveled on the continent during the Grand Tour. And there's a story told of his visit to Rome, found in John Tollen's 1700 edition of Harrington's political writings, which gives a little insight into his character. And we have actually very little direct evidence of anything about Harrington, apart from Tollen's edited edition of his writings. Harrington's papers were collected by his sister, Lady Ashton, and she in turn gave them to Tollen, who was writing 40 years after Oceana was written. We don't have the original papers today, so there's not a huge amount of source for all of this. At any rate, the story goes, and we have to say at this point as well, that Harrington, as well as a conservative Republican, was also very anti-clerical. So here's what happened in Rome. Going on a Candlemas Day with several other Protestants to see them perform the ceremony of consecrating wax lights, and perceiving that none could obtain any of these torches except such as kissed the Pope's toe. Though he had a great mind to one of the lights, yet he would not accept it on so hard a condition. When he and his companions returned to England and related their adventures to the king, Charles had told Harrington that he might have complied with papal custom merely as a mark of respect for a temporal prince. But Harrington replied that since he had had the honor to kiss His Majesty's hand, he thought it beneath him to kiss any other prince's foot. a major part and a major of his heritage and his influence was the fact that, like all educated men of his day, Harrington was well versed in the Hebrew Bible and thus familiar with the Jewish agrarian laws as set forth in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the books of Moses, also called the Pentateuch. Unlike another great political thinker, Machiavelli, who believed that all governments degenerate, thus rebellion and political upheaval are not only inevitable, but also desirable as leading to a purging of bad blood with a subsequent restoration of stability to the state. Harrington maintained that only a republic or commonwealth, not a state ruled by king or aristocracy, could maintain political stability. Harrington's point was that as political power is based on ownership of property, with actual land being the main currency at the time that Harrington was thinking and writing, and in fact, right up to the end of the 19th century, most wealth of the richest was in land. Land confers political power. Until the Reform Acts starting in 1832, only landowners could vote in parliamentary elections. And so the more that land was distributed throughout the general population, the more power accrued to the people. And thus rebellion against the ruling regime was unlikely. Rebellions such as that starting in 1641 in Ireland with massacres of both Protestants and Catholic civilians, while England was dealing with a Scottish invasion. England's difficulty is Ireland's opportunity. Power would also be diffused by having all political offices filled by men chosen by ballot for a limited term. The goal was political stability through permanency of land ownership, in which there could be no transfer of land and thus power by or to unscrupulous developers. The goal was that no sale resulting in a monopoly of power could occur. As Harrington explained in another political treatise, The Prerogative of Popular Government, if one wants to ensure that a form of government originally intended to be republican remains republican, one must establish a legislative device that perpetrates a democratic distribution of land. Hence the indispensable need in a republican constitution for an agrarian law. Did the Hebrews have such a law? Indeed, they did. Like Hobbes, Spinoza, and Locke, Harrington gave an extended account of the nature of the Hebrew Commonwealth. That period of time, starting with Moses as lawgiver, during which the Jews ruled themselves in their own land, and backed up by Old Testament scripture as a foundation for his vision of politics. Thus Harrington wrote, "This kind of law, fixing the balance of lands, is called agrarian, and was first introduced by God himself, who divided the land of Canaan to his people by lots, and is of such virtue that wherever it has held, that government has not altered, except by consent, as in the unparalleled example of the people of Israel. The Israelites, through conquest under Joshua, Moses' successor, were allocated territory in Canaan by their individual tribes. 12 tribes, 12 large tracts of land, which were then parceled out to individuals and families. Moses, acting for God, instituted a peaceful way to restore the vitality necessary for a permanent state. And remember, Machiavelli thought that the only way you could have a permanent state was for from time to time, there had to be violent eruptions, which would purge the system, and then you could start all over again. Moses, acting for God, instituted a peaceful way to restore the vitality necessary for a permanent state by restoring all lands to the original tribe every 50 years. Known as the Law of Jubilee, this meant that the freehold of land was never sold by men because the owner was God, and the land was only leased and therefore could never be concentrated in the hands of a few. So you couldn't have large, greedy, horrible landlords. For example, if an Israelite wanted to acquire a field, either in his own tribal territory or elsewhere, he didn't have to stick to his own patch. He paid the owner a price based on the number of harvests left till the next year of Jubilee, maximum 50-year leases. The Bible makes this very clear. Leviticus 25, 13 to 17. In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his holding. When you sell property to your neighbor or buy any from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. In buying from your neighbor, you shall deduct only for the number of years since the Jubilee. And in selling to you, he shall charge you only for the remaining crop years. The more such years, the higher the price you pay. The fewer such years, the lower the price. For what he is selling you is a number of harvests. Do not wrong one another, for I am the Lord your God. Harrington expounds that there's no clearer way of determining God's political or constitutional intentions than by looking at how the balance of property was first established. It was originally based on a divine lottery. Hence, God, in ordaining this balance, intended popular government. How was this change of Irish land tenure to be achieved? From native peasant farmers under the control of mainly Anglo landlords to Jewish tenants paying rent directly to the English. Harrington doesn't provide any detail except that which we read earlier in his proposal, except to say that the existing landlords would be removed and Ireland's Jewish tenants would pay England an annual rent of £4 million for the first 7 years, and much of which would be spent on English military protection. The rent then would reduce to £2 million a year when the paid English military presence would no longer be deemed necessary to protect the new tenants from the displaced English and native Gaels. And Ireland would pay its own locally raised army. Harrington's vision of a Jewish Ireland, populated by prosperous farmers who had reinstated the biblical Jewish agrarian laws, and with towns filled with dignified merchants, makes a refreshing change from the stereotypical view of the evil moneylender Shylock. Needless to say, Cromwell didn't agree to Harrington's proposal, nor did he hire him as a political strategist. Ireland remained under the control of the English with much continuing instability and woe. The Jews in England continued to be acceptable residents under Charles II from 1660. Charles, who had promised royalist Jews in Holland and France to secure toleration for his Jewish subjects, giving money and arms in return for their support. But it took another 292 years for the Jews dispersed throughout the world to arrive home in the 20th century. Like the continuing story of Ireland, peace and stability continued to be aspirational rather than actual for many years. But just think, what would Ireland have been like if even only a temporary Jewish tenancy of the land had replaced the English landlords? What would geopolitics look like, particularly in the Middle East? It's easy for us to laugh at James Harrington's proposal to Cromwell for the settling of two seriously troubling political issues in the mid-17th century. But we too need creative and lateral thinkers in our troubled times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I'm going to unmute or allow everybody to unmute themselves so that we could have some discussion and some questions. Hang on, everybody, and I won't do this. Let me change the view here. Right. Well, we've got a nice message from Shane. Very enjoyable, Catherine. I really enjoyed that. Very good. I think there was just so much information to take in. People are kind of mulling it over for a minute or two.
Yeah. Probably you're stunned.
I know, it's very good. Excellent. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. You know, if there's any aspect of the Jewish situation that Catherine spoke about that people were not familiar with, you know, please don't hesitate to ask about that. We're very happy to answer such questions. Catherine and I go to the same synagogue. Yeah.
What stopped it happening then? What stopped it happening that they didn't actually just do it?
Well, that is the great question. And to be honest, there is no evidence, there's no comment that we know of from Cromwell. It just didn't happen. It was an idea that was floated to him. And, you know, I certainly think it would have been, it sounds on paper anyway, to be a great solution to some really troubling things that he was dealing with, but it didn't happen. So I'm really sorry, I can't give you anything specific.
In the 16th century, Catherine, you said there was a Jewish burial ground in the Mile End in England. Yeah. Was that Elephant and Castle or was that Whitechapel?
Mile End, do you know? I don't actually know where it's near. It's somewhere in the East End, but I have no idea if it's Whitechapel. Yeah.
Mile End is an area of its own in London, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But it's near Elephant and Castle. Is it the Mile End and Elephant and Castle?
Mile End.
Mile End isn't near Elephant and Castle. Elephant and Castle is more south London.
Yeah, I was going to say that's south of the river. I'm pretty sure that Mile End is north. Yeah.
I just found that very interesting in the 16th century, you know. I was surprised, Catherine. I thought there would have been more Jewish communities in Elephant Castle, or sorry, in London at the time, you know. I was surprised.
Well, I think the problem was that they were officially banned in 1290 and they just weren't allowed in. And the ones who did come, they were, by 1630, this little community was in existence, but they had to kind of sneak in. And they called themselves Spaniards, not Jews, and most of them did come from Spain, but they weren't officially there.
I was surprised, you know.
I just had occasion to look it up for the record. Mile End is a district of the London borough of Tower Hamlets. And
I know Tower Hamlets, yeah. But I knew the name of Mile End. That's why, Tower Hamlets. I know Tower Hamlets, yeah. And that's amazing. Is it still there, I wonder? Because it must be
oh, yes.
grade A listed now.
It is. And I read an interesting article of a young woman who made, like a Londoner, who made a pilgrimage to the cemetery. And she found all of her relations going back to the origins. Yeah,
that's
so
amazing.
Now whether it's still being used or whether it's just historically there, I don't actually know whether they're still burying people there, but I would somehow doubt it. But yeah, no, that was interesting. She had a great success in tracing her ancestry.
We have a couple of questions from the chat that I'd like to get in on for people. I missed what part the Irish were to have under the proposal. Were they to be workers, or were they just to be thrown out?
Yeah, good question.
It's a very, very good question. And I seem to be taking shelter under, we don't know, but it's true. Literally, what I read to you is all that there was written out by Harrington. And it was in this whole manifesto for Commonwealth. But no, the implication, as I read it, is that they would be bosses, but I assume, yes, the Irish would be still subservient. But the fact that they were going to have paid protection obviously anticipated that there'd be, quite rightly, a huge amount of resistance to them taking over, which I suspect, Cromwell knew jolly well that he wasn't going to be able to pull that one off, He wasn't going to be able to do that. No, there's tantalizingly very little actual detail, which is quite annoying.
We have another question that I think is quite interesting. Had the penal laws already been instituted when this was proposed? I didn't catch any references to what would be done with the Catholics. Okay, that's kind of a similar question, but to put it into context of the penal laws.
I think they had been, but yeah, I think it's the vagueness of all of this that is quite frustrating. But I think that what Harrington is getting at is that a lot of turbulence and unrest and rebellion, which is what England had suffered as they saw it from the Irish, was caused by this inappropriate division of land and of property, and that if everyone had their own little patch, that things would work out. So I imagine that would mean that the Irish would have to have a stake in it. But again, we're not told. It may, in fact, just be a case of changing one landlord for another without any benefit. I hope that wasn't the intent. I don't think that was the intention, but it never got quite out.
Geraldine would like to know, are there any thoughts on why the expelled Jews from Europe didn't come to Ireland of their own volition? Did they read the Roman travelogue? It's too cold there.
It's definitely it, yeah.
That's a great thought, yes. How did they not get here?
But what? Seriously though, was the expulsion from England? Did that include Ireland? Were they forbidden to go to Ireland as well?
I don't think they were. I think Edward I just wanted them out, but of course he wanted to cancel all his debts because he had borrowed huge to finance his wars with France. He borrowed huge amounts of money from the Jewish merchants. And, this was one way of forfeiting.
Paying them back.
Yeah, I wish I could do that with the AIB. That would be great.
Yeah.
I think that might be something of the answer to Mary's question: why were the Jews expelled from England in the 13th century? Yeah.
Well, I think that partly it was literally, certainly on the part of the king and some of the nobles who also borrowed heavily, that was a major thing. But don't forget, there was also this huge misunderstanding actually of Jewish practices. And there was something known as the blood libel, which still went down through the centuries, that you may be aware of, where Christians were encouraged to think that Jews kidnapped and killed Jewish children, and to mix their blood.
Christian children.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Christian children, and killed them to mix the blood of the Christian children when they made their unleavened bread, the matzah, for Passover. And there was an incident during the time just before the expulsion where a young boy went missing and was falsely believed to have been kidnapped and killed by the Jews. And that was ostensibly the spark that set it off. But there had been that type of, and of course, in those days, as far as the church was concerned, the Jews were Christ killers. You know, they were responsible for the death of Christ. So that was the cry always, you know, before they were attacked.
Well, I've come upon a case of blood libel as recently as the 20th century in Italy, in Trentino. So it's something that really has lasted through the centuries.
Yes, and of course there was the dreadful Protocols of Zion, so-called, which was a totally false, forged book, which Tsar Nicholas II, the one who was killed as a result of the Russian Revolution, he was very anti-Semitic, and he thought that was absolutely true. And there are a lot of people, you can still buy it today, and it's, you know, about all the terrible things that Jews do, and that there's a worldwide conspiracy, they want to take over the world, etc. So yeah, no, these things tend to keep going. It's very difficult to
and Mary was very happy with your answer to her question, and she wants us reminds us that the son of Victoria, thanks to Albert, who was the first king to come to the throne with money of his own.
That's very good. Yeah.
Very, very good. Yes. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's incredible to think.
Our friend Eddie wants to know, what was the situation in Ulster? Did the same apply there?
The same in what sense apply there? The persecution of the Jews, or no? Or not?
Yes, Eddie, to be clear, was it the expulsion, or was that going to be part of what was handed over to the Jews under this proposal?
Yeah, I think, no, it was the entire island. Definitely the entire
32
island.
counties.
Yeah.
The 32 counties, Katherine, yeah.
Yeah, indeed, the 32 counties.
You wonder who actually stopped it, wouldn't you? Like, they never voted on it in England.
No, it never got to the Council of State. It was never, it literally, it stopped on Cromwell's desk. It never got off it. So
amazing. Yeah.
But I endlessly still fascinates me is that, you know, we really need this type of thinking. There's some wonderful books. There's one called The Hinge Factor, which deals with crucial moments in history, but, you know, often in battles, but where something happens and it changes everything. And, you know, it's things like this that get bright ideas that mostly don't get implemented, but we need to keep, I think, thinking of these types of possibilities for solutions to really deep, ongoing situations for all of us. You know, it would be great if we could do a bit more creative thinking.
Absolutely, yeah, you're right.
Any other questions or comments, discussion? We're
No,
open
as you
for
said,
any and
Catherine,
all
at the end of your talk, what if? Can you just imagine? You know, there's so many things in history that what if this happened? You know, and I guess it could have very easily happened. You know, I'd love to.
Yeah, we would have been the promised land, Catherine.
Yeah.
We would be little Israel.
Indeed. Well, there's one thing I would like to explain a bit, because I mentioned that at the time when the Whitehall Conference was called in the end of 1655, so 56, and this discussion was held by clergy and merchants and lawyers, you know, should we let the Jews back? And there was, between 1640 and 1660, all through the time of the Puritans and Cromwell and the parliaments, there was this thinking on the part of the Protestants. It's what has been taken over by the evangelicals today. This understanding, their understanding of Scripture was that the Jews had to be scattered first. They had to be scattered to all the world, and then at the right time, God would take them back to Palestine, or Israel as it is today. The point being that when that had to happen before Christ returned, because in the prophets, is it Isaiah, Jeremiah? I always get confused. There is the verse saying that they will look, meaning the Jews present in Israel at the time, will look on the one they have pierced. In other words, the one they crucified, and acknowledge him as God. So there's this, you know, the Jews have to get back to Palestine. They have to be scattered first, according to the prophets, and then they go back. And then this great revelation of the returning Jesus will convert them. So that's what this is all about. And then funny enough, the Jewish take on it is really very much the same as Rabbi Manasseh said to in his pamphlet to Cromwell. He said, we have to get back to England because the entire earth we have to be scattered totally to every country in the world before Messiah will come. And for us, for the Jews, Messiah hasn't come yet. For Christians, he's coming back. He's been and coming back. So we really were actually, it was two sides of the same coin, really, on a theological level, that the importance of letting the Jews back into England. So I hope that makes sense. It's a bit...
No, I get that, yeah. When did they let them back, Catherine? You said they weren't let in the 16th century, so then the 17th century, they came back in, did they? They let them back in.
Yeah, well, actually, they did come back in with Charles II in 1660.
Oh, right, yeah.
And you see, he married Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese princess.
Yeah.
And there were they were known as court Jews.
Oh.
And my father, we used to laugh. He was convinced that we were descended terribly smartly from some of these, but he could never prove it. So it's one of those apocryphal stories that all families have, I'm sure, in one way or another. There were some Portuguese Jews who had already, wealthy ones who had already established themselves in England, unofficially, but Cromwell protected them. And then Charles II comes, the restoration of the monarchy happens in 1660. And Charles is very pro the Jews and protects them, because then he promised them, because he got a lot of finance for his campaign to return and from them, but also his wife was very sympathetic as a princess of Portugal to the Portuguese Jews.
Very good, yeah.
Catherine, I was just going to make an observation that, you know, fast forward a couple of hundred years, in 1938, we as a country didn't cover ourselves in glory when we could have offered to take in Jews from trying to flee Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And our friend Dev said no.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But
I thought we let a boat of children in behind under the grid. No, did that not happen?
Yeah, there was some kinder transport that managed to get there, and I think they went up to the north. But the Free State, as it was then before we became a republic, we closed our doors.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry, did I?
No, the kinder transport that you're referring to, I think it got to Northern Ireland, which was, you know, separate from the Free State, as we were called at the time. But we closed our doors to Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Germany.
We did as a country and as a government, but there were some stunning individuals who did a lot to help. One of the Bewleys was help with getting visas. Where was he consul? He was consul in Austria? No, couldn't have been. Anyway, he helped tremendously. And there was even more exciting. There was a lady called Katherine Elms. Yes. And she took Jewish children and hid them and got them from France into Spain and then got them out. And she was extraordinary. And then there was Monsignor O'Flaherty.
Yes.
You know about him?
Yeah. Scarlet Pimpernel.
Absolutely.
That's right,
Yeah, very well, yeah.
And I think that he got 4,000, not just Jews, but people fleeing, you know, sort of Allied servicemen, let's say, who'd, you know, been shot down and things like that. He got 4,000 people. He vanished them from under the noses of the Nazis in Rome. Incredible what individuals did.
Yeah.
So we have something to be proud of.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Thank you.
Well, I hope I haven't bombarded you with too much.
No, I never heard that story before, Catherine. I never heard that story before. So it never went into the Irish. I never heard that any time in my life, that story. So it must have went into the Irish history books, you know, for our history, like, because we all know Cromwell, you know.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about it, it's interesting that you've actually picked up exactly on the problem. It's not known because it didn't get entered into state papers in any way. So as I say, literally the only existing thing is the fact that Harrington's sisters gathered up his papers and gave them to this writer and editor, John Tolland, who was able to then publish them. But there's very little mention of Harrington. And in those days, of course, you know, all the intellectuals, if you like, all the writers and the pamphleteers and everything, they all wrote copious letters to one another. So I think it's unfortunate that the materials disappeared, because there would have been a huge collection of correspondence. Everyone wrote letters all the time. Of course, there wasn't any other way to correspond. So it's a pity. It's intriguing. Yes, when you come to a kind of dead end with trying to unearth stuff, it's can be quite frustrating. But still, it's a nice story.
But but we weren't a free state then, Catherine. So we wouldn't have Irish people had any say in it. So then did the Jewish community in England, did they have a leader or a rabbi that had a say that they are going to be sent to Ireland? It would be interesting to know, wouldn't it, between the two communities, the Irish and the Jewish?
Yes. No,
did either of those communities have a say in the whole thing, you know, with Harrington and Cromwell?
I suspect not, but you've actually given me an idea for further research. So thank you very much.
I'm really interested in that. Did anyone have a voice in those days? a voice. In the 16th century.
Definitely, unless you were male and white.
With money, loads of money.
Loads of money.
It would be so intriguing though. Just imagine the Ulster, the Scots Presbyterians were in Ulster. The mere Irish like us were in Connacht, to hell or to Connacht. So I guess the Jewish people would have been in Baldbridge or somewhere fancy, you know, before. It would have been so good.
To hell, Connacht or Ballsbridge, I do.
Oh, yeah, history is amazing. All the what ifs, you know.
Oh, it's an amazing story. It's just an amazing story.
I had no idea of it whatsoever before Catherine told me about her talk. It was completely new to me.
Absolutely.
And like it was feasible, if you were Cromwell, it was entirely feasible, get rid of the Irish to kind of get rid of the Jews to wherever, and then everyone's happy. Like it's ideal,
Yeah, perfect. So, but it's something to remember as well is that Cromwell wasn't a well man by 1656. He died 2 years later, so maybe he just ran out of steam.
Catherine, do you know how he died?
No, I don't.
So he, during his campaign in Ireland, he was bitten by a mosquito. And mosquitoes at the time carried malaria. So he kept getting recurring bouts of malaria every year, and eventually finished off the bastard, because he's the most reviled person in Irish history.
Absolutely.
I mentioned before, I'm actually going to start a campaign to have a stone statue erected in Drogheda of a mosquito with a little plaque that says, this is the insect that killed Cromwell. If you walk past Westminster, there he is in all his pomp and glory, sitting on a horse outside Westminster. Revered.
Yeah, but like it's all who writes the history. Like he was born Cromwell was born and reared in a place called Ely, E-L-Y, near Cambridge. And my son lived in Cambridge, and I remember going to Ely to see, and there's a huge statue of Cromwell in the main street. You can go and visit his home. You can go and see where he went to school. Like you can he's like Perennial or whatever, So it's all, history is written by the winners,
Well, you heard it here, a stone statue of a mosquito in Drogheda town, okay?
You should. I dare you to do it. I dare you to do it. That's a very good
song. Tongue in cheek, but I'm going to try and start it. There you go.
You should, start a discussion,
Yeah. No, he's a hated individual here.
Oh, I know he is, and I was warned that I shouldn't even mention him, but it was a bit difficult.
I think in today's terms, he'd be comparative to the Taliban in Afghanistan. I mean, he basically, women were not allowed to wear makeup. He wanted a Christmas band, no celebration of Christmas. Unbelievable character.
And also, Maypole.
Thanks a lot, Catherine, for that.
Yeah, it was great.
Very good.
Jean Cantwell has had the proposal to start a GoFundMe for the malaria fly.
I think that'd be an interesting conversation every time we pass it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or if you like, Sean, we'll do a meetup. As soon as things get back to normal, we'll do a meetup to Ely, and you can go and kiss Cromwell's. You can go and visit Cromwell's bedroom and stuff. No.
Oh my God.
You know something? You don't need to go to Ely to go to Ely. This is one of the things I learned as a tour guide in London. There's a tiny little area, a couple of streets, and a pub off of High Holborn that actually belongs to the bishops of Ely, and actually doesn't count as London. It actually counts as Ely. It's a really nice pub, so we can all go there. We don't have to be out of London at all, and a nice pub. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
I like the sound of that. We go tomorrow.
I know. I go anywhere tomorrow if I could.
Count me in, please.
Yeah. No. History is fascinating, isn't it? No matter what country you're in, it's fascinating. There's always something to think about.
Absolutely. I grew up. My father, before World War II, was a lecturer in modern European history at Columbia University in New York. And our apartment there was filled with books. And my brother announced when he was a teenager, so many books and nothing to read.
Yeah, actually, there was you were talking about Jewish children coming to Ireland. There was a very interesting article, our program might have seen it a couple of nights ago on BBC about the Windermere children.
Oh,
yeah.
Very good, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah, it was kids that were brought after the war. When the war was over, they were brought from the camps to live in England. Yeah. About 100 of them. And it went into the story and their life story afterwards. Amazing program. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
There's one just quickly to say to you. I don't think I'll have any success, and I won't ask if I can come back to you with it, because there's not going to be enough. But apparently there, and I saw it, and I can't find it now, in Marsh's library in Dublin. There's a manuscript which mentions the fact that in the 4th century, Irish monks kept Shabbat. That is, they stopped work on Friday night and were not permitted to work until sundown on Saturday. And they were actually fined if they broke the rules. So I'm going to have to try to figure out some way of getting there, and I'm trying to carry on a bit of digging, but anyway.
May I ask you, Katherine, you know the lady who traced her ancestors back to the Mile End? Yeah. When they come over, first of all, was that lady living in Israel and she traced it from Israel to the Mile End?
No,
that's
not
two bits of that story. That's a very interesting story.
No, it actually, no, and I'll find, I was just looking at it a couple of days ago, I'll find it again online, but no, she was English.
Oh, very good.
And Jewish and living in London, and I don't know how she, got put on to the fact that she might be able to find some of her family buried there, but she did. So she actually saw their names on the tombs.
Amazing. And the next question, when they came over from Spain, pretending to be Spaniards, did they have to put a handle on their name and use a Spanish surname? Or did they actually just come in with their actual proper names and say they were Spanish? That's interesting, isn't it? To try and get into a country.
Yeah, that's a good...
I just think that's a very interesting story. What you said.
Of course, the surnames, a lot of people, particularly Jews, didn't have surnames really for up until the 18th, 19th century. So you were, as in the rabbi that I referred to, his name was Manasseh ben Israel, son of Israel, son. So and no, I don't. That's a very good question, though. I don't. They would have just, I guess, had a Spanish name.
Yeah, that's interesting.
They would have stories. Well, they'd often have names having to do with what they did for a living, what their trades were.
Yeah, exactly. I heard that.
Goldsmith or
the carpenter. Solomon the carpenter family. Do you know the way they used to put the handle on their name?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's very interesting. 2 bits of that story with the woman tracing it and then them coming in, under the grid with, not bringing attention to themselves. It's a very good story,
Good. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've had a lovely time with you all. So I
think I'm going to stop the recording now. People could carry on chatting as much.